Okay, so we've talked about direct object pronouns. Now let's talk about indirect objects and their pronouns. Recall, a direct object answers the question who or what. So an indirect object has its own set of questions, but they are different. To whom and for whom. For example, I bake cookies. I bake cookies for my friend. What do I bake? Cookies. That's the direct object. For whom do I bake these cookies? For my friend. That's the indirect object. Let's look at some examples and see if you can identify the indirect objects in a few sentences in English. Okay, indirect object pronouns. See if you can identify the indirect object pronoun in this sentence. Mike buys her a bracelet. What does Mike buy? A bracelet. That's going to be my direct object. For whom does Mike buy the bracelet? Her. That's going to be my indirect object. Remember, who or what Mike buys is the direct object. For whom or to whom is the indirect object. Let's look at another one. I take my sister the backpack. Take is my verb. What do I take? The backpack. To whom do I take the backpack? My sister. This is my indirect object. All right, so what are the indirect object pronouns in Spanish? Well, as it were, they're very similar to the direct object pronouns. Me, te, nos, and os. But our difference is that in the third person, instead of lo, la, los, or las, we have le and les. And these are singular and plural, but they're gender neutral. You can use le with a masculine or feminine word. Les, same thing. It's plural, but you can still use it with a masculine or feminine. All right, let's take a look at this example. I have doy el libro a Juan. Doy el libro a Juan. Now, as always, first thing we want to do is find the verb and then identify the subject. So, doy is my verb and my subject is yo. Now, do I have a direct object? What do I give? I give the book, el libro. That's my direct object. To whom do I give the book? A Juan, to Juan. So Juan is going to be my indirect object. Well, what would be the pronoun that goes with Juan? Well, it's third person, not giving it to me, not giving it to you, I'm giving it to him. So my object pronoun will be le. Okay, so where do I want to put this object pronoun? Go back to those original rules from the direct object lesson. I want to put that indirect object pronoun before the conjugated verb. Le doy el libro a Juan. Whenever I have an indirect object in the sentence, I want to make sure that I'm using the pronoun. This part here, a Juan, I consider that to be optional. It can be there for clarification, and it's especially good to clarify sentences where the indirect object is in the third person. Okay? If I say, for example, in English, I give the book to him, if you don't have any context of who him is, you might be confused. Same thing in Spanish. If I just say, le doy el libro, and I don't give you any context, you might not know who I'm talking about. So I would include a Juan as a point of clarification. Le doy el libro a Juan. I wouldn't necessarily have to do that if the indirect object was te, because it's clear that I'm giving the book to you. Te doy el libro. I give the book to you. I could always add in a ti for added emphasis. But I don't have to have it there for clarity because this makes it clear. So to recap with indirect objects, I always like to have the indirect object pronoun before the conjugated verb whenever I have an indirect object in my sentence. I think it's good practice. I think it's grammatically sound to do that. Now, what about indirect objects in compound verb phrases? Same rules apply that apply to direct object pronouns. Okay? So, meaning that I want to put the object pronoun, in this case we're talking about indirect objects, so the indirect object pronoun, I want to place that before the conjugated verb. Okay, here's a sentence. Te voy a dar las llaves. Let's identify my verb. Well, I've got a compound verb phrase. Ir plus a plus infinitive equals going to do something. Okay, so voy is the yo form of the verb ir. Dar means to give. Voy a dar, I am going to give. Right? What am I going to give? Las llaves, that's the direct object. What, therefore, is the indirect object? To whom am I going to give the keys? To you. Te voy a dar las llaves. So here I've written it with the object pronoun before the conjugated verb. I have another option. I can attach it to the end of the infinitive. Voy a darte las llaves. Voy a darte. So I just attach the te to the infinitive. Perfectly okay. You have those two options. This is the final piece of the puzzle. What do we do when we have an indirect object pronoun, but we also want to replace the direct object in the sentence with a pronoun as well? We have double object pronouns. The first thing I want you to do is write down this formula. Okay, we have our indirect object pronoun, then our direct object pronoun, then our verb. I've said over and over, you need to put the object pronouns before the conjugated verb, right? Well, when you have both indirect object and direct object, this is the order. First, the indirect object pronoun, then the direct object pronoun, then the verb. It's inverted when you think about it in English. In English, we say, I give it to him. In Spanish, we say, to him, it, I give. Right? To him, it, I give. This is why this formula can come in handy until you get the hang of it, all right? Now, I've put the S here because if you have a given subject, for example, if I want to say, she gives, I can put ella here, but it's not necessary all the time. That's why it's in parentheses. Look at this sentence. Te preparo el desayuno. Desayuno is breakfast. Okay? Let's identify the verb. Preparo. That's the yo form of the verb preparar, to prepare. What do I prepare? ¿Qué preparo? El desayuno, the breakfast. So this is my direct object. What I want to do is replace el desayuno with the object pronoun. What is the object pronoun for el desayuno, a masculine singular word? Lo. But I also have an indirect object and an indirect object pronoun in my sentence. I prepare breakfast for you. Te preparo el desayuno. So now I've got to go back to that formula so I can replace el desayuno with lo in the right order. Remember, it goes indirect object pronoun, then direct object pronoun, then the verb. So I like to start with the verb. What's the verb? Preparo. So we'll put that in place. Then I will look at my indirect object pronoun, te. Then I ask the question, what's the direct object pronoun? Lo. And now I have my sentence. Te lo preparo. All right. I wish it were that simple, but we've got this one tricky little thing that we need to address. And that's what I like to summarize in the expression, is that you can't lay low in Spanish. What do I mean by that? Take a look. Le preparo el desayuno a Rosa. Okay? Instead of the object pronoun being te, it's now le. Everything else is the same. Preparo en el desayuno. So I want to rewrite this sentence using double object pronouns. Now, in Spanish, when we're working with direct object pronouns, we have to be careful of what I call the lay low case. And you can't lay low in Spanish. What do I mean by that? Let's take a look at this sentence. Le preparo el desayuno a Rosa. Well, I've got my verb, preparo, and I have an indirect object, le and a Rosa. I also have a direct object, el desayuno. What do I prepare? Breakfast. So I can replace that in the sentence with a direct object pronoun, which would be lo. So if I want to rewrite the sentence and replace the direct object and the indirect object is included, I'm going to end up with a lay-lo situation, where I have le, lo, preparo, le and lo together. And this cannot happen. You can't have any combinations of le and les with lo, la, los, or las in Spanish. So when you have a lay-lo situation, what are your options? Let's take a look. Simply change le or les to se. Here's our sentence. Le preparo el desayuno a Rosa. I've got my grouping, my formula, which is indirect object pronoun, then the direct object pronoun, then my conjugated verb. Written incorrectly, it's le lo preparo. Well, I changed le to se, and I end up with se lo preparo. That's correct. Follow along with me now with this PowerPoint as I explain how to use double object pronouns with compound verb phrases. In Spanish, we can have double object pronouns and compound verb phrases. Let's take a look. You want to make sure you follow this grouping. Keep your indirect object and your direct object pronouns together, always putting the indirect object pronoun first. This has to stay together whether or not you place the grouping before the conjugated verb, or if you attach it to an infinitive or participle as part of a compound verb phrase. Let's take a look at this example. Te voy a dar las llaves. Well, we have an indirect object, te. We have a compound verb phrase, voy a dar, and we have a direct object, las llaves. Everything's going to work around our compound verb phrase. I'll sometimes tell students to pretend that they're is sort of an invisible force field around the compound verb phrase, and nothing can get inside or break up. So we're not going to disrupt the compound verb phrase by adding any pronouns in between. We're going to have a couple of options. We're going to place the pronouns before the conjugated verb. So we have te las voy a dar. Remember, las would be our direct object pronoun representing las llaves. Notice that we keep the grouping the same. We've got our indirect object pronoun, then our direct object pronoun, then our compound verb phrase. We have another option. We can attach the pronouns to the infinitive. There's our sentence. There's our verb phrase, pointing out that this is the infinitive. We attach the pronouns together. We end up with voy a dártelas. Now you'll notice once we add the pronouns to the infinitive, we have to add an accent to dar, to the a in dar. That's to preserve the original stress of the syllable because we've added two new syllables to the end of the word. Let's compare them. We have te las voy a dar, voy a dártelas. My pronouns are the same. Their positioning is different, but it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. The meaning of the sentence is exactly the same. These are identical in meaning. So, when we have compound verb phrases and double object pronouns, our lay lo rule still applies. We can't lay low in Spanish. So here we have a sentence. Les necesito comprar regalos a mis primos. Well, if we write it and place the object pronouns in front, we have se los necesito comprar. Los taking the place of regalos. But I can also add these pronouns to or I can attach them to the infinitive comprar. Necesito comprárselos. And again, you'll notice that I have an accent over the ar in comprar in order to maintain the original stress because I've added two new syllables. Now, all of this applies to the present progressive with the participle as well. We have the phrase estoy preparando una pizza. We can add to that an indirect object pronoun. Te estoy preparando una pizza. What do I prepare? A pizza. For whom? For you. So now in our sentence we have an indirect object and a direct object. Well, I can rewrite that, putting the object pronouns before the conjugated verb, estoy, te la estoy preparando, or I can attach them, estoy preparándotela. Keeping my pronouns together, te and la, and also adding an accent over the a and ando in order to preserve that original stress. Preparando, preparándotela. I've added two new syllables to the end of the word, so I need to indicate that the stress hasn't changed. Okay, hopefully this video has given you a better idea and understanding of how to use direct objects and indirect objects and their pronouns, as well as double object pronouns in the same sentence in Spanish. Feel free to reach out if you have more questions. Buena suerte y nos vemos.